राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनंदना ब्रजजनरंजना यशोदानंदना ब्रजजनरंजना यशोदानंदना ब्रजजनरंजना यमुना तीरावनचारी यमुना तीरावनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी गोपी जनवल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदनंदना ब्रजजनरंजना यमुना तीरावनचारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधवा कुंज विहारी ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकीनन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। Hare Krishna. So today we are reading from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th chapter. The chapter is titled The Cause of All Causes, text number 25. Tamasadapi bhutader vikurvanat abhunnabah tasya matra gunashabdo lingam yadrashtra drishyayoh. तामसादपि भूतादेर विकुर्वाणादभून्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः। तामसादपि भूतादेर विकुर्वाणादबोन्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः तामसादपि भूतादेः विकुर्वाणादबोन्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः तामसादपि विभूतादेः विकुर्वाणादबोन्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः. माताजी's दपि भूतादेः विकुर्वाणादबोन्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः तामसादपि भूतादेः विकुर्वाणादबोन्नभः तस्य मात्रा गुणशब्दो लिंगम यद्द्रष्टृदृश्ययोः. Word to word meanings. Tamasad, from the darkness of false ego. Api, certainly. Bhuta adehe, of the material elements. Vikurvanat, because of transformation. Abhut, generated. Nabaha, the sky. Tasya, its. Matra, subtle form. Gunaha, quality. Shabdaha, sound. Lingam, characteristics. Yat, as its. Drashtru, the seer. Drishyayoho, of what is seen. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. From the darkness of the false ego, the first of the 5 elements, namely the sky, is generated. Its subtle form is the quality of sound, exactly as the seer is seen, as the seer is in relationship with the seen. Purport. The 5 elements, namely sky, air, fire, water, and earth, are all but different qualities of the darkness of false ego. This means that the false ego, in the sum total form of Mahat Tattva, is generated from the marginal potency of the Lord. And due to this false ego of lording it over the material creation, ingredients are generated for the false enjoyment of the living being. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, even though the background is the Supreme Lord. Factually, save and expect the Lord, no one can be called the enjoyer, but the living entity falsely desires to become the enjoyer. This is the origin of false ego. When the bewildered living being desires this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after a phantasmagoria. It is said that first the tanmatra, sound, is created and then the sky. And in this verse, it is confirmed that actually it is so. But sound is the subtle form of the sky, and the distinction is like that between the seer and the seen. The sound is the representation of the actual object. As the sound produced, speaking of the object gives an idea of the description of the object. Therefore, sound is the subtle characteristic of the object. Similarly, sound representation of the Lord in terms of his characteristics is the complete form of the Lord, as was seen by Vasudev and Maharaj Dasharath, the fathers of Lord Krishna and Lord Rama. The sound representation of the Lord is non-different from the Lord. from the Lord himself, because the Lord and his representation in sound are absolute knowledge. Lord Chaitanya has instructed us that in the holy name of the Lord, as sound representation of the Lord, all the potencies of the Lord are invested. Thus, one can immediately enjoy the association of the Lord by the pure vibration of the sound representation of his holy name, and the concept of the Lord is immediately manifested before the pure devotee. A pure devotee, therefore, is not aloof from the Lord even for a moment. The holy name of the Lord, as recommended in the Shastras, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, may therefore be constantly chanted by the devotee aspiring to be constantly in touch with the Supreme Lord. One who is thus able to associate with the Lord is sure to be delivered from the darkness of the created world, which is a product of false ego. Tamasima Jyotirgamaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshuronmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroh Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute तप्त कांचन गौरंगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So, the current discussion in the 5th chapter of the 2nd canto, this is a conversation between Brahmaji and Narada Muni, where Narada Muni requested Brahmaji to speak about, one of the questions was Yatas Srishtam, how this universal creation happens. So in response to that, Brahmaji is describing how the whole creation happens, and he is currently discussing about how from the false ego in the mode of ignorance, tamasa ahankar, how these various elements and their tanmatras, bhumir apo analo vayu kam, and their tanmatras, rupa rasa sparsha gandha shabda, how they are manifesting sequentially from the subtlest to the grossest. That is the discussion that is happening right now. So this is the first verse which describes manifestation from the tamasa hankar. How first shabda is created from the shabda, ether, and then in the subsequent verses tomorrow we will see that how from ether the sense of touch is created from the sense of touch, air is created from air, then form, then from form, fire, like that. That whole creation will be described. And subsequently, how these elements combine together to form a fully functional universe will be described later. So today, we will just try to discuss, of course, it's a very profound purport and many different themes we could take from this particular purport, but we will just take one small portion of Srila Prabhupada's purport today and try to see what we can discuss from that. Srila Prabhupada in his purport writes, the 5 elements, namely sky, air, fire, water, and earth, are all but different qualities of the darkness of false ego. This means that the false ego in the sum total form of Mahat Tattva is generated from the marginal potency of the Lord, and due to this false ego of lording it over material creation, ingredients are generated for the false enjoyment of the living being. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, though the background is the Supreme Lord. So later he says, when the bewildered living being desires this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after a phantasmagoria. So once one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples asked Srila Prabhupada, why did the Supreme Lord create this material universe because of which we are suffering? So he wanted to ask this. So he said, Prabhupada, why did the Supreme Lord create this material universe? Before even he asked the next part, Prabhupada said, the Lord did not create, you created. So which means it was created for you because you wanted to enjoy separately from Krishna. Right? So the point that Prabhupada writes here is, when the bewildered living being desires this to be the enjoyer, then the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after a phantasmagoria. So now the question is, when and why the living entity got bewildered? This question naturally arises. So this theme of the living entity getting bewildered is described in this very beautiful verse of 11th canto, Teachings of the Navayogendras to Nimi Maharaj. Very sequentially and beautifully this theme comes out. Famous verse, oftentimes Srila Prabhupada quotes this verse, Bhayam dvitiya abhiniveshatas Ishad apetasya viparyayo asmritihi tan mayayato buddha abhajettam bhaktyayika isham guru devatatma. So this verse says, what happens first? He says, Ishad apetasya. The living entity, Ishad apetasya, means he turns his face away from Krishna. For the Jiva who is averse to the Lord, Ishad apetasya, what happens? Tan mayayato. Maya Devi catches hold of him. And then, how does she induce him? Viparyayo asmritihi. 2 things. Okay. Viparyaya means, asmriti means making him forget what he really is by the avaranatmika Shakti. And Viparyaya means making him identify with the body through the Vikshepatmika Shakti or Prakshepatmika Shakti. And because of this, what happens? Dvitiya abhinivesh. Abhinivesh means absorption. Dvitiya means that which is not the self, which is the body. And because of this Dvitiya abhinivesh comes bhayam. Bhayam is the fear of samsara. Okay. So, and this verse does not just say how this whole bondage of the Jiva happens, but it also says how one can escape this bondage. So he says, Buddha, the intelligent person Guru Devatatma, who accepts the Guru as his worshipable Lord and his very self. And by such acceptance, Tam Isham Bhajet. And when he worships the Supreme Lord, Ekaya Bhaktya, with unadulterated devotion, Anyabhilashita Shunyam, Jnana Karma Dhyanavritam Anukulyena Krishnanushilanam, Bhakti Ruttama. That is Ekaya Bhaktya. Then he can escape. Buddha Abhajetam Bhaktyeka Isham Guru Devatatma. That is the means of escaping. How? So the whole thing started with the Jiva becoming averse to the Lord. So the ultimate solution is when the Jiva becomes favorably disposed towards the Lord, and that favorable disposition towards the Lord can come only through the agency of the Guru. Right? So that's what this verse talks about. So understanding this role of Maya, the second Chatushloki of Srimad Bhagavatam describes the nature of Maya, or the role of Maya. Rite artam yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyad atmano mayam yata baso yata tamaha. So the Lord says that how do you understand how the Maya functions? He says, Rite artam yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyad atmano mayam. So Maya has three parts: Pradhan, Vidya and Avidya. Okay. So what does Pradhan do? Pradhan creates all the elements that are needed for manifesting the subtle body and gross body, or this material universe with all its subtle and gross elements. Okay. And the Avidya potency makes the Jiva identify with that body. Why? Ishadapetasya. Because he wants to enjoy separately from Krishna. But constitutionally it is not possible. Because Mamaivamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. The Jiva is constitutionally a part and parcel of Krishna. So he can only imagine to be separate from Krishna. That imagination is created by the Avidya, and that whatever he can imaginarily identify with, that is the gross body and subtle body, that is created by Pradhan. But when the Jiva realizes or understands that no, actually I cannot be happy in this material world, I wish to go back, then the Vidya potency acts on him and helps him go back. So all these three are within the realm of Mahamaya only: Pradhan, Avidya and Vidya. So he says the Avidya potency has two roles: Artham na pratiyeta and Anartham pratiyeta. Artham means what? Real. That which is real. Pratiyeta means through, Artham na pratiyeta. The self is Jiva, right? We are not this body, we are the soul. So the Avidya potency covers that. What is real, one is unable to see. Just like in darkness, real things cannot be seen. And there is fear of false things that may be there. Okay. Like you may see a rope and think that it is snake. But because there is no light, there is no way you can verify it. You can't touch and see, I will verify whether it is rope or snake. It might be a costly examination. Right? So, but when the light comes, final examination, it may become the final examination in this body. So, when darkness is there, real objects cannot be seen, and there is fear of false objects. So that is Avidya. So Avidya has these two potencies: Prakshepatmika Shakti and Avaranatmika Shakti. The Avaranatmika Shakti covers the real thing. The real thing is the soul. The Avaranatmika Shakti does not allow the person to identify with the soul. And there is fear of false identification with false things. The body is not real. Anartham pratiyet. Okay. But when the jiva understands that this world is not a fit place for me to live, I should leave this world, then the vidya potency guides him. How? Artham pratiyeta, anartham na pratiyeta. When you switch on the light, that which is there you see. There is a pot in the room, there is a pillar in the room, everything you can see. And you can clearly see there is no snake or a scorpion, whatever it is, right? So, that is the role of vidya potency. So, which means when a person is ready for liberation, the vidya potency guides him to identify with the soul and not identify with the body. But even this is within the realm of Mahamaya only. Because by this kind of role of vidya, one can only come till the stage of self-realization. Ultimately, by taking up to the practice of bhakti, pure bhakti, only then one can reach the stage of prema and completely reach the stage of self-realization. Okay. So, in this material world, there are three categories of people. Okay. Materialists, sadhakas, and perfected devotees. Of course, the second and third categories are very rare. The third category is extremely rare. Okay. So, for the materialists, so the role of Maya is orchestrating life situations for the jivas. Okay. So whether it is Yoga Maya or Mahamaya. Yoga Maya acts on perfected devotees, Mahamaya acts in the material world. Okay. So, for the materialists, ordinary materialists of this material world, the life situations are orchestrated by Mahamaya. But on the basis of one's karma. On the basis of one's karma, Mahamaya puts the living entities in particular situations. And they respond to those situations based on the swabhava that they have accumulated. So they are put in a particular situation. Like for example, if Mahamaya puts them in a situation, let's say there is a buffet. Okay, there is a buffet. Like, okay, this morning I was there taking prasadam, breakfast. Okay, there were 4 items. Okay, pongal, khichdi, coconut chutney, and masala bath. Okay, 4 items were there. Okay, so I took pongal and chutney, and the devotee sitting next to me took khichdi and masala bath. Exact, opposite. So the choice is there based on one's past experience. When Mahamaya puts us in a particular situation, our response is according to the vasanas that we had accumulated. This is for materialists. The materialists, Mahamaya puts them in situation according to their karma. And the response of the jiva is according to his vasanas. For the sadhakas, okay, for the perfected devotees in the spiritual world and in the material world, Yogamaya puts them in particular situations under the guidance of Krishna. Okay. And their response to that situation is according to their spiritual vasanas that they have accumulated. Prema. Like, for example, Mother Yashoda, Krishna opened the mouth and there was universal form seen. So Yogamaya also covers and shows. First, universal form pratiyeta. It saw the universal form. She saw the universal form. Okay. For a moment, she got bewildered. But then again, universal form na pratiyeta. The universal form was removed by the Yogamaya. Okay. And after that, she considered various reasons and finally said, none of these reasons is true. Krishna is totally dependent on me and I need to protect Krishna. That is the ultimate reality. So her response was according to the prema which was there within her heart, right? So the role of Yogamaya and Mahamaya is to put the living entities in particular life situations, and the response is according to their qualification, their vasanas. But when it comes to sadhakas in this material world, like all of us who are practicing pure devotional service, the life situation is orchestrated by which Maya? Yogamaya or Mahamaya? Actually, Mahamaya. Okay. I don't want to take a poll because by then the class will be over. So the life situations of sadhakas are orchestrated by Mahamaya, but under the guidance of Krishna, not under the guidance of karma. Because Yogamaya acts only on perfected devotees who are ready to participate in the pastimes of Krishna. Okay. So Mahamaya acts in conditioned souls, whether they are conditioned materialists or conditioned sadhakas. But in conditioned sadhakas, Mahamaya acts under the instruction of Krishna and not according to one's karma. So therefore, the life situations presented for a devotee in the form of suffering, happiness, etc. are not according to karma, but according to Krishna. Okay. Anyways, so therefore, so now, what about the jivas in Brahmajyoti then? Okay, jivas in Brahmajyoti, because for action you need two things. For any action, you need an external trigger and you need an internal disposition to respond to that trigger. Like for example, if I have to do the action of eating, okay, so when I go to the kitchen, there should be an external trigger in the form of one bucket with, pongal, one bucket with chutney and whatever, right? And I need to have an internal disposition of past experience. Oh, I always liked pongal and chutney, like that. So then there is an action of taking that pongal in the plate and eating it, right? So for any action, there should be an external trigger and there should be an internal disposition to respond to that trigger. In the material world, the living entity, that external trigger is created by Mahamaya. And they all have material vasanas based on which they respond. In the spiritual world, Yogamaya orchestrates the external situation, and the response is according to their particular flavor of prema, which is there in their heart. Okay. So now, the jivas in Brahmajyoti, they are under which Maya? Yogamaya or Mahamaya? Actually, none. They are neither under Yogamaya nor under Mahamaya. There is no use for external trigger because there is no internal vasanas, because all the material vasanas have been purified and no spiritual vasanas have been developed because they are not practicing bhakti. So because there is no internal material vasanas or spiritual vasanas, therefore there is no need for external trigger. It will not generate action. Therefore, the living entities are inactive in Brahmajyoti. So now one may say, how can the living entity ever be inactive? Because oftentimes we hear the real nature of the living entity is to be active, right? How many of you have heard Srila Prabhupada mention this? The living entity can never be inactive, it is always active. That is its nature, right? So, but if you see, and does anyone remember which verse Srila Prabhupada quotes to substantiate this point? Prabhupada quotes this verse, Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatu tishtat yakarma krit karyate hi avashak karma sarva prakriti jair gunaihi. Verse number 3.5. Okay. This is the verse that Prabhupada quotes. But if you see what that verse actually indicates, it indicates that conditioned souls cannot remain inactive even for a moment. Why? karyate hi avashah karma. They will be helplessly pushed to perform actions. By what? Prakriti jair gunaihi. By the gunas of Prakriti in the form of vasanas which is there within their heart. That will push them to act. So that verse does not talk about the constitutional nature of the soul to be active. That verse indicates why conditioned souls cannot be inactive, because their conditioning will not allow them to be inactive. So, is the constitutional nature of the soul to be always active? Yes. But for that action to happen, so it is the potential. The Jiva has the potential to act. Jada Vastu does not have potential to act. Jiva has the potential to act. But for the Jiva to realize that potential, it needs internal triggers and external triggers. Internal triggers in the form of vasanas, either material or spiritual, and external triggers in the form of Yogamaya and Mahamaya. So for a Jiva in Brahmajyoti, there is neither the internal trigger, no material vasanas, and no prema. Therefore, there is no need for external triggers, Mahamaya or Yogamaya. So they remain inactive there. Okay. So, anyways, so talking about this whole concept of, bhayam, the fear of samsara for the Jiva in this material world is due to dvitiya abhinivesh, bodily identification, bodily absorption. And that bodily absorption is due to viparyaya and asmriti, due to identification with the body and inability to understand that we are not this body, we are the soul. And this is created by Maya. And why Maya catches the Jiva? Ishad apetasya. Because he has turned his face away from Krishna. So the question is, when the Jiva turns away, and why? The $1 million Jiva fall down question. Right? Why and when? This is the question that naturally comes. Srila Prabhupada's answers to these questions are very confusing at the surface. But it needs some understanding to understand how profound those statements were. Srila Prabhupada said, go back and find out. Why did the Jiva come? Go back and find out. Okay. Or, Prabhupada said, focus on going back. Don't try to investigate. If a mosquito bites and you get malaria, which mosquito bit me, because of which? Don't try to do that research. Focus on getting cured. What Prabhupada said. For a long time, I always felt Prabhupada is just trying to avoid answering this question. Right? How many of you felt like that? Right? So it looked like that, at least for me. I have to be honest. Right? So, but in Jaiva Dharma, in the 15th chapter, there is a very interesting discussion. Very illuminating discussion. The discussion is between the Guru and disciple. The disciple's name is Vrajanath. The Guru's name is Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj. There is a conversation. So, I will just take a particular section of that. I am not going to tell the past story, future story and everything. So, Vrajanath asks Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj, earlier you have explained that the spiritual world as well as the Jivas are eternal. You said the Jiva is eternal, spiritual world is eternal. But you are also talking about the Jivas taking birth and creation of the spiritual world and all that. So when you say creation of the Jiva or creation of the spiritual world, then they cannot be spiritual. Then they must not have existed before. So why you are speaking like this? Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj says, very illuminating answer. Please hear carefully. Every sentence is a loaded sentence. He says, time and space as experienced in the material world is quite different from time and space in the spiritual world. Material time is divided into 3 sections: past, present, and future. Right? That's how. But in the spiritual world, time is ever present without any division. And this is illustrated in a beautiful pastime in the spiritual world. Gopakumar goes to the spiritual world. Okay, he is in Goloka Vrindavan. In Brihad Bhagavatamrita, this episode comes. So Gopakumar is observing the pastimes there. Something very interesting he observes. Okay, various pastimes are happening. One day Akrura comes. Okay, to take Krishna away to Mathura. I am cutting the long story short. Okay, somehow he manages to convince Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda, and after lot of struggle and resistance from the Gopas and Gopis, finally Akrura manages to take Krishna and Balram to Mathura. There Krishna goes, kills Kamsa, kills Kuvalaya, Pida, Chanura, Mushtika, everyone, and pacifies the Mathura Vasis. And in the meantime, Vrajavasis are in deep distress. They are going to die in separation from Krishna. They are at the verge of death. And Krishna gets the message. So Krishna somehow pacifies the Mathura Vasis, comes back, and he spends such wonderful time with the Vrajavasis that the Vrajavasis become so absorbed. Whether the Vrajavasis are experiencing love in the form of union or separation, it is so absorbing that they forget the past and there is no future. Na shochati na kangshati. Because the presence is so absorbing. Right? Like for example, even in the material world, there is a faint experience of this, at least for a short time, when someone is absorbed in sense gratification, forbidden sense gratification, let's say. Coming under the urge of that instant gratification, he knows the repercussions are serious, and he has experienced it in the past also. But when he comes under that intense passion, he forgets the past, what happened, and he forgets the future of what is going to happen in future. He becomes so absorbed in the present, but that is only for a short time in the material world. As soon as that urge subsides, there is immediately lamentation because of the thinking of the past and anxiety about the future. Immediately catches up. Even though certain very absorbing things in this material world, bind a person to the present very strongly, but it is just a question of time when his past and future will catch up with him very quickly. But in the spiritual world, it is not like that. In the spiritual world, whether the spiritual Nityasiddha associates of the Supreme Lord, whether they are experiencing union or separation, it is such an absorbing thing. It's not that there is no past or future. There is no experience of past or future because the present is so absorbing. And this is observed by Gopakumar. As an observer, he is observing. And Gopakumar, so the Vrajavasis become very absorbed. They forget about the past, forget about the future. And guess what? After some time, Akrura comes again. And the same pastime repeats. He comes and somehow convinces Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj to take Krishna and Balram with them. And same kind of drama happens. The gopis and the gopas, they sort of stop. But then he manages to take them. He goes there, kills Kuvalayapida, kills Chanura Mushtika, kills Kamsa, pacifies the Mathuravasis. In the meantime, the Vrajavasis are at the verge of death. Krishna gets the message. Krishna pacifies the Mathuravasis, rushes back to Vraja and gives them such an experience that in their union they become completely absorbed in the present. And guess what? Akrura comes again. And Gopakumar is seeing that the same pastime, same few pastimes are repeating. But because there is no remembrance of the past, no anxiety of the future, because they are so absorbed in the present. So there is no experience of past and future in the spiritual world. That's how all these pastimes remain ever fresh, even though they are repetitions. So there is no experience of past. Similarly, in the pastime of Lord Narasimhadev appearing in the 7th canto, when he tears Hiranyakashipu and he is in that Ugra Roop, Brahmaji and the demigods, they request Mother Lakshmi, please go and pacify him. And she says, I have never seen this form before. I don't even know who he is. Abhuta Purvam Yadrupam, it is mentioned. Never seen before. What do you mean never seen before? In the previous universe where Narsingha Leela happened, the same Leela happened. And now it is happening here. After the next universe, wherever it is going to happen, is millions of times the same pastime has happened. But every single time, Mother Lakshmi says, I have never seen this form before. And she is not faking it. Really, she has never seen that form because of the absorption in the present. There is no remembrance of the past. That's it. So that expression is with genuine emotions. She is genuinely astonished to see that form of Narasimhadev. And she genuinely feels, I don't know who this is. I have never seen this form before. Right? So, therefore, he says that in the spiritual world, time is ever present without division of past, present, and future. All spiritual activities and happenings of the transcendental realm are perceived in Vartaman, whereas whatever incidents are normally experienced here are rooted in the notions of mundane time and place. So when we discuss spiritual subjects, when we are discussing spiritual subjects, we say things like, later the Jiva became entangled with Maya. So then immediately we will think, later means, before that later happened, the Jiva must not have entangled with Maya. So then the question is, why did the Jiva get entangled with Maya? And when did this happen? These questions naturally come. Right? So, or when we hear the spiritual world was created, which means before being created, it must not have existed. Right? Like that. So, our words are being influenced by the concept of material time. We cannot actually, because we have not experienced spiritual time where only present is there, there is no experience of past and future. When we actually, when even spiritual subject matters are explained, we try to understand them based on our understanding of material time only. We interpret them within the language of material time and our experience of material time. So, in all discussions about the Jiva and transcendence, our thoughts cannot be freed from the concepts of mundane time, which automatically enter our deliberations. We will naturally think in terms of mundane time only. Thus, inevitably, we talk and think in terms of past, present, and future. However, he says, when you consider the inner meaning of this topic, keep in mind that a person who is solely searching for realization of the pure essence of the absolute truth will perceive and apply the concept of eternal, ever-present time factor in understanding these topics. Now, how are we expected to even apply this? Very difficult. So he says, the Guru tells the disciple, dear young man, you must be extremely cautious while deliberating upon this subject. Which subject? The Jiva fall down subject. Simply absorb yourself in the spiritual concepts and reject the unavoidable mundane dross caused by the words. Because it's talking about a transcendental subject. But material sounding words are used to describe. and immediately you will think in terms of your material experience within the realm of material time. For example, he gives an example. Guess which example he gives? Krishna buliya say jeev boga vancha kare, nikatastha maya tare japatiya dare. That is the verse he says. Oftentimes, the Vaishnavas speak like this, or the Vaishnava Acharyas speak like this. Krishna buliya say jeev. The Jiva having forgotten his real identity. The immediate next question is, when did he forget? Why did he forget? The very fact that you are telling forgotten means he must have remembered before. These type of questions come. Okay. But even though the Vaishnavas speak in this way, however, all the Vaishnavas know that the Jiva has an eternal nature, of which there are two types. One is Nitya Baddha and Nitya Siddha, or Nitya Mukta. But the subject is put in this way so that ordinary human intellect can understand something. So he says, why these things are there? What is the meaning of, what is the import when he says, Krishna buliya sejiv boga vancha kare? He says, what he is trying to communicate is that forgetting Krishna is the cause of all inauspiciousness, and remembering Krishna is the cause of all auspiciousness. Therefore, never put yourself in a situation where you will have to forget Krishna. That is the message that is being communicated. That is where the Acharyas are trying to shine the light. But where we look into forgotten bolana, it says forgot, which means remembered before, he must have remembered it before. Then the question is, why did he forget? When did he forget? These questions come. Okay. So he does not understand the actual purpose of why it is spoken in that particular way, because it has to be spoken about the inauspiciousness of forgetting Krishna and the auspiciousness of remembering Krishna for that purpose. Like we see the Shaka Chandra Nyaya. Okay. A mother is feeding food to the child. So she wants to show the child what is a moon. So she shows, okay, look, that round white object in between the two branches, that is the moon. Okay. What is the purpose? Because the child cannot comprehend anything beyond that. Okay. So therefore, you have to communicate in a way that the child can comprehend according to its age and maturity. Right. So now, if the child asks, who inserted that moon between the two branches? This kind of question. Or the mother is feeding that food, and after some time she is moving, and the child sees that the moon is in between, he is able to see the moon in between the windows. So then he may ask, what is this? And the mother will say, moon. But the child may ask, what do you mean? But you told me that the white object in between the branches is the moon. Now how did that moon come here? The child cannot understand because of its lack of maturity. But still, the mother has to educate the child according to his level. So she says, okay, the child is, the moon is in between the branches, Shaka Chandranyaya. But the introspective sage perceives the spiritual truth in the quietness of his Chit Samadhi, or devotional meditation. That is how one can understand. So he says that concerning these topics, you see, this is a very important point. He says, concerning these topics, there is no room for debating or arguing, because applying material logic to spiritual subject matters is a futile exercise. This is the problem. And then you know what he says? I am aware that you cannot immediately comprehend the depth of this argument. So which means, as Vrajanath is a sadhaka, so we cannot understand. Okay. But you know what he says? However, as your devotional practice and spiritual attachment increases, your power to discriminate between matter and spirit will be sharpened. So when you actually progress spiritually, then your ability to discriminate between matter and spirit will become sharp. So therefore he says, you must begin the process by sincerely chanting Harinam. So how do you understand the Jiva fall down? Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, sincerely chant Harinam. What happens by that? Thereby your spiritual identity will be manifest gradually. And concordantly, your perception of the spiritual world will take discernible shape. Which means, unless your heart is purified, don't try to understand the subject matter where you are. Because where you are, at that stage, it is not understandable. That's what he says. It is like, how can you explain a 5th grade student integral calculus or differential calculus? dy by dx, d by dx of sin x is cos x. You tell the child, he will say, what are you talking? Only numbers can be divided, alphabets cannot be divided. That's what he will say. Because that is, so he will try to understand it based on his logic. You tell 4 by 2, 6 by 3, he will understand. D by dx of sin x, he will not understand. Because that is not according to his level. So this is a subject matter whose answer is there. But it is comprehensible only at the stage of self-realization. That's what he's telling. Okay. So, therefore he says, my advice for you is that you do not approach anyone and ask for a decision upon this philosophy. Don't go and approach people and tell, did Jiva fall down or not? Did Jiva fall down or not? He says, don't ask. He says, instead, chant attentively and let your internal purification happen and you progress from anartha nivritti to nishtha to ruchi to asakti to bhava to prema. And in this way, when you reach the stage of perfection, spiritual perfection, then you will be able to understand. Otherwise, if we try to understand it at our current level, in another essay in the book Bhaktya Loka, he writes, why the Jiva turned his face away from Krishna. He says, this can be understood only on the realm of spiritual time. Again, the same argument. This cannot be understood on the realm of material time because a sadhaka is only within the realm of material time. He cannot understand the subject matter. Why? When? No. He cannot understand. How? Why? When? All these things. Okay. So, therefore, and this is natural, right? So, therefore, in order to resolve doubts, sometimes if it is resolvable at our level of spiritual maturity, we may hear the answers and understand, oh, this is how it happens. But sometimes we have to have the maturity to resolve the doubts by understanding that it will be resolved in future. That is needed. Otherwise, we will get tormented by those doubts and it will lead to lack of faith, losing faith. Okay. So, therefore, if you see Srila Prabhupada's answer of go back and find out, it's actually a very scientific answer, because unless we are fit enough to go back, we cannot find out, because at our level this cannot be resolved only. And exactly same thing Bhaktivinoda Thakur is also explaining here. Okay. I will just end this with one thing which I am not supposed to do, but I just took permission from Rudranath Prabhu for this. Okay. So, this whole Jiva fall down thing, in the way that our acharyas have explained, is summarized in one particular song in a Hindi movie. Of course, it was not written for that purpose. It was written for some totally mundane purpose. And I don't wish to sing. It says this is a holy seat. So we should not be sitting here, what to speak of talking about mundane things. But I apologize to the deities for doing this. But there is this beautiful, not beautiful actually, but the words are very much reflecting, what we have discussed. The conclusion, if you have to understand this whole thing, Okay, Prabhuji is telling, okay, go ahead. So the song is, some of you must have heard, long old song. ये क्या हुआ, कैसे हुआ, कब हुआ, क्यों हुआ, जब हुआ, तब हुआ, ओ छोड़ो, ये ना सोचो. That is the conclusion. क्या हुआ, कैसे हुआ, how did this happen? I mean, just think in terms of, what, we have discussed about the Jiva fall down, what he has mentioned. कैसे हुआ, कब हुआ, when did this happen actually? Huh? क्यों हुआ, why did this happen? So then he says, जब हुआ तब हुआ. When it had to happen, it happened. But what he says, ओ छोड़ो, ये ना सोचो. So what we have to think about your sadhana, chant the Harinam properly, get purified internally, and when we become qualified to understand, we will understand. So interestingly, the name of the movie in which this song comes actually answers this question also. The name of that movie is Amar Prem. So when we actually reach the stage where our prem becomes Amar, eternal, actually then we can understand ye kya hua, kaise hua, kab hua, kyun hua, everything, all answers will be resolved only when we reach that stage of eternal love for Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. ये ना सोचो